Under the blistering California sun, the road stretched out like a cruel ribbon of mirage and silence. Heat waves rippled from the blacktop as if the ground itself was trying to rise and escape. Savannah Blake stood on the shoulder of the road, her arms wrapped around the limp body of her daughter, Lily. Her feet were bare, blistered from the scorching pavement, her sundress torn and damp with sweat and dust. Her lips were cracked, her eyes red-rimmed, but the pain in her body was nothing compared to the weight she held in her arms. Lily wasn't responding, not to her whispered name, not to the gentle rocking motion, not even to the soft song Savannah tried to hum, a lullaby from when she was just a baby. The child's skin was burning, her breath shallow. Her arm, injured from an earlier fall, hung awkwardly at her side. Savannah sank to her knees, pressing her daughter closer, shielding her from the sun with her own body. She had one bottle of water left, almost empty, and too warm to offer real comfort. She unscrewed the cap and dripped a few beads onto her fingertips, pressing them gently to Lily's parched lips. The girl didn't move. A flicker of panic rose in Savannah's throat. "Baby, please," she whispered. "Please wake up. I'm right here. I need you to stay with me." Cars passed. 1, 2, then a dozen more. No one stopped. Some drivers turned their heads. Some didn't even glance. Her body ached. Her voice was nearly gone, but she still raised a trembling hand each time, hoping, pleading, for someone to see them, to stop. Hours earlier, she had stood at the wrought iron gate of the Kingsley estate, holding Lily in her arms, her voice cracking as she begged for help. Her daughter had been feverish all night. Savannah didn't care about pride or protocol. She just wanted a doctor, an ounce of compassion, anything. Veronica Kingsley, regal and cold in white. Linen had stood just beyond the threshold. "You're not family," she'd said, her tone as sharp as glass. "You lost that right the night you killed my son." Savannah had tried to explain. Mason had been drinking. He was angry. He had called her from the car, ranting, speeding, reckless. She hadn't gone to the gala that night. Lily had been sick, crying, and she stayed behind to care for her. Mason never made it home. The crash ended everything. Veronica didn't want excuses. Only someone to blame. "You brought this on yourself," she hissed, her face tight with grief twisted into cruelty. "Now leave." And then the gates had shut. The click of the lock was louder than Savannah expected. Final, ruthless. She had carried Lily down the long drive on foot, sun beating down, heart pounding with fear and helplessness. Halfway to the road, Lily had stumbled from her arms, her head hitting the gravel, her cry weak, her arm bending wrong. Savannah had screamed, but the estate remained silent behind its manicured hedges and polished windows, with no money, no car, no phone with battery, and no family willing to take her in. Her own mother's voice still ringing in her ears. "You chose Mason, now live with it." She kept walking, and now she sat, crumpled on the side of Highway 62, with nothing left but a child who might not make it through the hour. She pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, whispering prayers she no longer knew how to believe in. "Take me instead," she whispered to the sky. "Just let her stay." The sun moved higher. The heat was no longer a presence. It was a punishment. The air burned her lungs. The light stabbed her eyes. Her skin was already peeling at the shoulders. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Then, in the distance, the low hum of a truck grew louder. She barely looked up, expecting it to pass, like all the others. But it didn't. The engine slowed. Tires crunched gravel. A door opened. Savannah didn't lift her head, not out of defiance but out of resignation. There was no strength left in her body, no more hope to waste. Then she heard boots, heavy steps, a pause and a voice, low, even. "She's burning up." She didn't answer. Her arms clutched Lily. "Tighter. I've got cold water," the voice continued. "A truck with AC and a doctor who owes me a favor." Still, she said nothing. "I won't touch you," he added. "I'll just leave this here." A moment passed. Then, the soft thunk of a plastic bottle being placed on the ground. Savannah opened her eyes, squinting against the glare. A bottle of water, cold, beaded with condensation, sat just feet away. She reached for it with shaking fingers, unscrewed the cap, soaked her fingertips, pressed them again to Lily's lips. A flutter, a faint sigh. She looked up. The man stood a few paces, back-faded jeans, weathered boots, a gray t-shirt. Late 40s, maybe. He looked more tired than intimidating, more human than she expected. His face was roughened by sun and silence. His posture, steady, respectful, said everything. No threat, no judgment, just presence. Savannah's voice was barely a breath. "Why? Did you stop?" The man didn't blink. "Because you needed someone to." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, as if pulled by something deeper than logic, she slowly stood on unsteady legs, Lily pressed against her chest. He opened the truck door. She climbed in, not because she trusted him, not yet, but because he hadn't turned away. And for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had stayed. The truck rumbled steadily over the winding roads, the desert sun finally softening as dusk crept in. Inside, the air conditioning hummed, offering a relief so profound it felt almost surreal. Savannah sat in the back seat, her arms wrapped protectively around Lily, who was still burning with fever but breathing a little easier now. The cool air brushed over their skin, drying the sweat and calming the thrum of panic that had been her constant companion all day. For the first time in hours, Savannah allowed herself to exhale, not in relief, but in exhaustion. The man driving hadn't spoken since they pulled away from the roadside. His presence was quiet, almost too quiet, but not in a way that felt threatening. It felt intentional, careful. He glanced back at them in the rearview mirror every few minutes, his eyes lingering on Lily to check her chest was still rising and falling. He didn't ask questions. He didn't explain himself. He simply drove, hands steady on the wheel, navigating the roads like someone who knew where safety lived. As they drove deeper into the high desert, the surroundings changed. Less dust, more trees. The air shifted subtly, as if the land itself recognized the need for gentleness. Eventually, the truck turned down a gravel path lined with cottonwoods, their branches arching toward each other like hands folded in prayer. At the end of the drive stood a modest ranch house, low, brick-faced, with a wide porch shaded by an overhang. The porch light clicked on automatically, casting a soft amber glow across the worn steps. He parked without ceremony, cutting the engine with a smooth turn of the key. Then he climbed out and walked to the back door. For a moment, Savannah stayed frozen in the back seat, her fingers locked around Lily's small body, her mind still bracing for the worst. The man opened the truck's rear door and spoke gently. "Let me help." His voice was calm, deep, and without urgency, just assurance. She didn't respond at first. Couldn't. Her throat was tight. Her eyes burned. After a pause, he leaned in slowly and reached for Lily, careful not to touch Savannah herself. When she nodded, he lifted the child with ease, cradling her gently like she was something precious and breakable. Inside, the house was quiet, clean, sparse, but not cold. The kind of place built not to impress, but to withstand storms. The living room opened into a hallway, and down it, he led her into a small guest bedroom. The bed was already made with fresh linens. A ceiling fan turned lazily above, and the windows were cracked just enough to let in the cooling desert breeze. He laid Lily down softly, pulling the blanket back and tucking her in. Then he turned and left the room without a word. Savannah sat at the edge of the bed, brushing her daughter's hair away from her damp forehead. Lily stirred faintly, murmuring something incoherent, her lips dry and trembling. Savannah whispered to her, singing the end of a lullaby she hadn't sung in years. Her hands trembled, not from fear now, but from the sudden, overwhelming stillness. Her body didn't know how to rest. Her mind didn't know how to believe it was allowed. A few minutes later, the man returned carrying a basin of water, a towel draped over one arm, and a small bottle of children's fever reducer in his free hand. "I've seen a few bad fevers," he said quietly. "This should help bring it down." He set the items on the nightstand without trying to administer anything. Warm water, not cold. It draws the fever out slow. Savannah looked up at him for the first time. Really looked. He wasn't young. Lines traced around his eyes and mouth, not from worry but from wear. His skin was tanned and wind-creased. His clothes were simple, jeans, boots, and a gray shirt that had seen better days. But his eyes were gentle, watchful, not invasive. She cleared her throat. "Thank you for stopping," he nodded once. "Name's Weston Hale, this place is mine." "I'm Savannah," she said softly. "That's Lily." "She's tough," Weston said, then turned to leave again but paused at the door. "There's clean towels in the closet, help yourself." Then he was gone. The door didn't click closed behind him. It stayed slightly ajar, as if to say, "You can leave, but you don't have to." Savannah dipped the towel into the basin and gently wiped Lily's face, arms, and legs. The girl whimpered slightly but didn't wake. Her color was still worrisome but no longer terrifying. Savannah worked slowly, methodically, the way desperation teaches a mother to move. As she wrung the towel out, her eyes caught on something Weston had left at the base of the nightstand, a folded flannel blanket, and a note in blocky handwriting. "You can sleep here. Doors stay unlocked. No one's coming for you tonight." Savannah's breath hitched. She hadn't realized until that moment just how tightly she had been holding herself, inside and out. Later that evening, after Lily had finally begun to sleep, more peacefully, Savannah stepped into the hallway. The house was still. From the kitchen, the soft clatter of dishes and running water told her Weston was nearby. She followed the sound and found him at the sink, rinsing a coffee cup. He didn't turn around. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." "I don't want to impose," she said. "You're not," he replied. "But you can stay quiet if that helps." Savannah leaned against the doorframe. "You didn't ask any questions." "Didn't seem like the night for answers." She nodded slowly, unsure why those words brought tears to her eyes. Maybe it was because he was right. Maybe because there was a grace in being allowed to simply be, without explaining the bruises. "On your story." A draft curled through the open window, and Savannah shivered. Weston noticed and walked to the coat rack near the door. He picked up a denim jacket, then stepped behind her and gently draped it over her shoulders. She flinched just slightly. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said softly. "Keep it. Nights get colder out here." Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them, not spark, not promise, just recognition. Two people who had seen too much, carried too much, and knew how to hold silence the way others held speech. Savannah stayed up a while longer, sipping lukewarm coffee, listening to the creaks of the old house, the sound of crickets outside the window, the faint rise and fall of her daughter's breath through the thin walls. It wasn't safety. Not yet. But it wasn't the road. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't fear. It was enough. For tonight. Morning broke gently over the ranch, the sky bathed in pale amber and soft lavender. A breeze rolled through the cottonwoods outside the guest bedroom window, stirring the curtains like fingers brushing fabric. Inside, Savannah stirred, awake in the armchair beside the bed, her neck stiff from sleeping upright, her body aching in that deep, soul-weary way that only comes from living too close to fear. Her first thought was Lily. Always Lily. She reached out instinctively and touched her daughter's forehead. It was cool. Cool. Not clammy or burning, not the fevered heat she had feared would never break. Just warm. Normal. Savannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. One that carried with it days of anxiety, nights of helplessness. She pressed a kiss to Lily's temple, careful not to wake her, and closed her eyes again for a moment, letting the relief seep in slowly. Outside, she could hear the low murmur of a rooster, the distant creak of a screen door, and the steady rhythm of boots on wood. The world was waking up, not to chaos or threat, but to a quiet that felt like permission. Permission to stay, to exist. Savannah found Weston in the kitchen. He was pouring coffee, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up when she entered but didn't speak right away. He simply poured a second cup and pushed it toward her across the counter. "How is she?" he asked, voice low. "Sleeping," Savannah said, her voice still hoarse. "Fever's down." Weston gave a small nod, as though he'd been expecting nothing less. There was toast on the table. Simple, browned perfectly. A jar of jam beside it with a label that read, "Peach Spring 24. Savannah's stomach growled, surprising her. She hadn't eaten since she couldn't remember when. She hesitated, but Weston only pulled out a chair. "Eat," he said, not as an order, but as a quiet offering. The toast was warm, the jam sweet and a little tart. She didn't speak, and neither did he. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a space that had been cleared, like a room dusted and aired, waiting for something true to fill it. Later that morning, Lily woke. Her voice was groggy, her eyes puffy, but she smiled when she saw her mother. "I dreamed about chickens," she mumbled. Savannah laughed, a sound that startled even her. Weston appeared in the doorway with a bowl of sliced apples and a storybook, tucked under one arm. Without asking, he sat beside Lily and began to read in a slow, even voice. His delivery was clumsy, not theatrical like a seasoned storyteller, but real. Lily giggled as he gave the fox a growl and the rabbit a lisp. Savannah watched from the doorway, something tightening and softening in her chest at the same time. By afternoon, Lily was sitting up, wrapped in one of Weston's old shirts that hung past her knees. Savannah carried her out to the porch, where a blanket had already been spread, a little pitcher of lemonade and crayons set neatly beside it. She blinked at the sight. "Did you?" Weston shrugged. "Seemed like a good day to color." As Lily drew sunflowers and horses, Savannah sat beside her and looked out over the land. The field stretched long and quiet, dotted with patches of mint and wild thyme. A chicken wandered past, clucking indignantly. Savannah laughed again, more freely this time. The next few days settled into a rhythm Savannah didn't realize she craved until she had it. Mornings began with eggs and toast, followed by walks around the edge of the property. Weston showed Lily how to collect eggs from the coop. She named the hens Poppy, Daisy, Queen Cluck. Savannah helped Weston in the sati garden, pulling weeds with quiet hands, listening to the wind move through the trees. The scent of mint rose from the earth, fresh and grounding. When she confessed she used to bake before things got complicated, Weston asked if she wanted to use the kitchen. No fanfare, no urging. Just the keys to an old recipe book and a bag of flour. One afternoon she made banana bread. The scent filled the house, warm and nostalgic. Lily danced in the kitchen, her face streaked with flour, singing a made-up song about muffins. Weston passed through once, said nothing, but lingered long enough to eat 2 slices warm from the pan. That night, as dusk settled, they sat on the porch again. Lily had fallen asleep on a nearby bench, curled around her stuffed fox. Savannah and Weston watched the stars emerge one by one, their lights quiet and ancient. She turned to him, her voice almost hesitant. "Why did you stop that day? No one else even slowed down." Weston didn't answer right away. He ran a hand down the side of his jeans, thoughtful. "Years ago," he said finally, "I was driving through Utah, saw a kid, maybe 17, walking, barefoot along a canyon road. Didn't stop, didn't even slow. That night I heard on the radio that a boy had died of heat stroke on that road. Still don't know if it was him." He looked at her then, not searching for pity or understanding, just telling the truth. "I promised myself I'd never pass by again." Savannah stared at him, her heart aching. Not just for the boy, but for this man who carried that guilt like a stone in his chest. "You kept that promise," she said quietly. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Before heading inside, Weston retrieved a small box from the corner of the porch. He handed it to Lily, who had just stirred from her nap. "It was my daughter's," he said softly. "She used to love brushing her doll's hair with it." Inside was a worn wooden hairbrush, smooth from years of use. Lily's eyes lit up. It smells like cinnamon. Savannah's breath caught. She hadn't cried in front of Lily, not once, not when Mason died, not when they were thrown out, not even during the fever. But now, holding that brush, that memory, she wept quietly, her tears falling without sound as her daughter leaned into her and whispered, "Mama, it's okay now." It wasn't not entirely, but something had shifted, not an ending, not quite a beginning, just a place where breath could come easier, where kindness didn't demand explanation. And for Savannah, that was more than enough. The envelope came tucked between a seed catalog and an electricity bill, but Savannah knew it didn't belong. It was thicker, heavier, official. Her hands trembled before she even read the seal. Shady Valley County Court. A rush of cold ran through her spine despite the spring warmth surrounding the ranch. She opened it slowly, the weight of dread already pressing down on her chest. Inside, the words struck like lashes. Petition for legal guardianship. Filed by Veronica Kingsley. Grounds: endangerment, negligence, mental instability. Savannah's breath caught. Her fingers clutched the paper tighter as her knees buckled, forcing her to sit on the edge of the steps just outside the house. The rest of the world was calm. Birds chirped lazily in the trees. A breeze stirred the mint leaves growing in the garden bed. But inside Savannah, something shattered. Not from surprise, part of her had known this might come, but from the cruelty of how easily someone could still try to take Lily away. As if love could be overwritten by influence, as if the life she had fought for was still up for auction. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Weston stepped outside, wiping oil from his hands with an old rag, a wrench tucked in his back pocket. He saw her face, the papers in her lap, and the stiffness in her shoulders. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't have to. He sat beside her without a word and waited until she spoke. "They're trying to take her," Savannah said, her voice hollow. "Veronica. She filed for custody." Weston didn't react right away. He simply nodded once, then reached over and placed his hand lightly over hers. "Then we'll fight." That night, Savannah couldn't sleep. She lay on the floor beside Lily's bed, listening to her daughter's soft, even breathing. Every now and then, she would reach out and touch her daughter's hand, needing the contact, needing to know she was still there. Memories kept pressing in. The courtroom where she had fought for custody after Mason died. The whispers in the hallway. The looks. The way Veronica had sat tall and emotionless as if Savannah were just a misstep in her son's legacy. Even when Savannah had won, she knew the victory wasn't final. Veronica had resources, friends in high places, power, and now she was using it again. The next morning, Savannah didn't go into town. She couldn't. She wasn't ready for the stares, the murmurs. Somehow, news always traveled faster than logic in small places. Instead, she baked. It was all she could do to stay grounded. Her hands moved through flour and eggs and cinnamon like she could knead strength back into herself. Later, when Lily came inside from the garden, pink-cheeked and holding a drawing of her and Weston building a chicken coop, she paused. She saw the papers on the kitchen table, saw the tightness in her mother's smile. "Mama," she asked quietly, "am I in trouble?" Savannah turned, startled. "What?" "No, baby." Lily looked down. "Are they taking me away?" Savannah dropped to her knees in front of her daughter and pulled her close. "Never, you hear me? Never. You are mine, Lily. Nothing will change that." Lily nodded, but her hands clutched tightly at her mother's shirt. That night she refused to sleep in her own bed. She curled into Savannah's side, her breath hot against her arm, and Savannah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, memorizing the sound of every inhale. The next morning, Weston brought someone to the ranch. Maddie Price, a lawyer from Palm Springs, tough as leather with a voice like stone and eyes that missed nothing. "She's good," Weston said. "She doesn't lose." Maddie took one look at Savannah and said, "I'll make this simple. You've got a case. But we need more than truth. We need proof, documents, testimonies. You ready to fight?" Savannah nodded slowly. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do, Maddie said. And you've already made it. Now let's get to work. Over the next few days, the ranch turned into a quiet war room. Eleanor, Weston's mother, surprised them all by showing up with a box of old emails, voicemails, and a written statement describing the night Savannah and Lily were turned away from the Kingsley estate. I've seen what grief can do, Eleanor said, her voice low. But this isn't grief. This is revenge disguised as concern, and I won't be part of it. Savannah blinked. Why are you helping me? Eleanor gave a faint smile. Because you didn't ask me to. Each morning, Savannah made breakfast like clockwork. Eggs, bread, fruit. It gave her hands something to do while her mind tried not to spiral. Maddie continued gathering evidence. Weston quietly rebuilt an old bookshelf and reinforced the barn roof, staying close without crowding. One evening, Savannah sat alone on the back porch, staring at the trees. Weston joined her, handing her a cup of tea. Why is it, she asked, her voice trembling, that no matter how hard I try, it feels like someone is always waiting to call me unfit? Because people fear what they don't understand, Weston said simply. And you? You've survived things most people can't imagine. That scares them. It makes them want to put you in a box, define you. Savannah looked down. What if the judge believes them? Then we keep going. But I'll be standing next to you no matter what. She met his eyes and found something there, unwavering, unflinching. Not the promise to fix it, but the commitment to stay even if it broke. The next day, Maddie handed Savannah the final court brief. You're ready, she said. Savannah took it, her fingers brushing over the cover. Do you think they'll see the truth? Maddie smiled, fierce and sure. They won't be able to miss it. And for the first time since that envelope arrived, Savannah felt something steady beneath her feet. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was resolve. And that was enough. The courthouse smelled like dust and old paper, like too many stories had been spoken here, and most of them hadn't ended well. Savannah sat at the long table near the front of the room, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Her heart thudded low and hard, but her face remained composed. She wore the only dress she owned that still felt like hers, not something left over from her marriage, not something borrowed. Simple, clean, honest, like she wanted to be seen. Weston sat beside her, still and quiet, his presence a constant thread through the storm. Maddie, in her sharp blazer and boots, stood reviewing papers, her jaw set with purpose. Across the room, Veronica Kingsley looked like a woman attending a charity gala, not a custody hearing. Flawless hair, pearl earrings, a dress that cost more than Savannah made in a month when she used to have a job. Her lawyer was younger than Maddie but reeked of entitlement, the kind of man who had never lost a case simply because no one had ever let him. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with kind but unreadable eyes and a voice that cut through the courtroom like a clean knife. She asked the standard questions, names, dates, relationships. Savannah answered each one with steady breath and clear voice. She refused to let herself be small today. Veronica's attorney started with the expected, photos of Savannah on the side of the road, her torn clothes, her bare feet, her daughter in her arms. He framed it as recklessness, instability, danger. Your Honor, he said, voice polished and smooth. This woman, while perhaps well-intentioned, has demonstrated a repeated pattern of endangering her daughter's welfare. She left the Kingsley estate without resources, without a plan, and wandered into the desert with a child suffering from a fever. She has no home of her own, no income, no family support. Savannah felt her stomach twist. Every word framed the truth like a weapon. The attorney continued. The petitioner, Mrs. Kingsley, is prepared to offer Lily a stable environment, financial security, a home with history, a name with legacy. Maddie stood slowly. With all due respect, Your Honor, what Mrs. Kingsley offers in financial security, she lacks in something far more essential: compassion. Savannah Blake may not have money, but she has what this little girl needs more than anything else in the world. A mother who shows up, even when it costs her everything. The judge turned to Savannah. Mrs. Blake, you may speak now. Savannah stood, legs wobbly. For just a second, she met the judge's eyes, then looked toward Veronica, whose lips curled ever so slightly in anticipation of failure. My daughter, Savannah began, was born in the middle of a thunderstorm. Mason wasn't there. He was out celebrating with friends. I gave birth alone, and I held her while the power flickered and the wind howled outside the hospital window. That night I promised her I would never abandon her. And I haven't. Not once. She looked down briefly at her hands, then back up. Yes, we were on the side of the road. Yes, I was barefoot. Yes, she had a fever. But I stayed. I carried her when I could barely stand. I begged strangers. I faced people who slammed doors in my face. And still, I stayed. Savannah's voice didn't break. If anything, it sharpened. I don't have a trust fund. I don't have a famous name. But I have never once let my daughter believe she was unloved. Not even for a second. There was silence when she finished. Thick, unyielding. Then Maddie stood again. We would like to call one more witness, she said. If the court permits. The judge raised an eyebrow. Who? Lily Blake. The courtroom buzzed. Veronica's lawyer objected, claiming the child was too young. But the judge allowed it, with limits. Lily was led into the room by an officer who bent down and explained what was happening. The little girl walked with careful steps, her favorite stuffed fox in one hand. Her hair in two messy braids Savannah had woven that morning. She climbed into the chair, too tall for her legs, and swung her feet nervously. Maddie crouched beside her. Hi, Lily, she said softly. Do you know why you're here today? Lily nodded. They want to know where I should live. And where do you want to live? With Mama, she said immediately, then glanced around the room. And with Weston. The judge leaned forward. Why do you want to stay with them? Lily fiddled with the fox's ear. Because my mama holds my hand when I'm scared. And Weston makes me tea with honey. And nobody yells. The judge smiled faintly. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Lily thought hard, then said, We planted mint. Mama says if you take care of something small, you learn to take care of bigger things. Savannah closed her eyes for just a second. When she opened them, the judge was nodding. That's all, Lily. You can go back to your coloring now. As she was escorted out, Lily turned once and waved. Savannah waved back, heart swollen. When the judge returned from chambers half an hour later, Savannah held Weston's hand beneath the table. His thumb traced small circles on the back of hers. The judge's voice was calm and direct. After reviewing all submitted evidence, testimonies, and statements, I find no grounds to support the petitioner's claims. The motion for guardianship is denied. Full legal custody remains with the child's mother, Savannah Blake. Savannah didn't cry, not then. She just closed her eyes and breathed, letting the words settle over her like a blanket. Veronica didn't speak. She rose stiffly and walked out, her heels echoing across the courtroom tile like the end of a performance no one clapped for. Behind her, Weston stood. Eleanor, who had sat silently in the second row, walked forward and placed a hand briefly on Savannah's shoulder. Not a hug, not a display, just a gesture of acknowledgement, the kind that says, I see you, I believe in you. As they left the courthouse, the sun hit her face full on, and Savannah tilted her head toward it. Lily ran to her, arms outstretched, and Savannah lifted her without hesitation. She held her daughter close, felt her heart against hers. She had fought. She had won. And more than anything, she had stayed. The days after the hearing passed in a quiet Savannah had never known. It wasn't the silence of dread or isolation anymore, but the kind that comes after a storm, the kind where everything is still standing, but nothing quite feels the same. The ranch didn't change, not in any visible way. The trees still swayed. In the afternoon breeze, the chickens still clucked with disinterest in human affairs, and the sun still dipped behind the same hills. But inside the house there was a lightness that hadn't been there before, Savannah noticed it in the way Lily laughed, a little louder now, a little freer. In the way Weston moved through the house, not cautiously, not distantly, but as someone who belonged, who had allowed others to belong too. And in herself she noticed the quietest shift of all. She wasn't bracing for something to go wrong. One morning, she woke before dawn, not because she was afraid, but because the scent of rain teased through the cracked window, and something about it called her outside. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped onto the porch where the sky was just beginning to color, streaked with lavender and dusty rose. Behind her, the house was still, Lily curled up in bed, Weston asleep on the couch where he'd fallen the night before, a book open on his chest. Savannah sat on the steps and listened to the world breathe. Later that day, Lily came home from school carrying a crumpled piece of construction paper. "It's us," she said proudly, handing Savannah a drawing that showed 3 figures beneath a big tree, 2 tall, 1 small, all holding hands. "And that's your dress," Lily added, pointing to the figure with long brown lines. "And Weston's hat, and me with my fox." Savannah felt something crack open gently inside her, the way a frozen creek begins to move again in spring. She kissed Lily's forehead and said nothing, because there was nothing to fix, nothing to explain. The picture spoke for itself. They spent more time in the garden after that. The mint was thriving, and so were the tomatoes and green beans. Lily had planted a patch of wildflowers from seeds Weston found in the shed, and they'd started to bloom, little splashes of blue and orange and white. Weston said it looked like someone had spilled summer on the soil. One afternoon, Savannah and Weston stood side by side near the fence line pulling weeds. Lily was lying in the grass nearby, her feet in the air, humming a song that had no tune. Savannah wiped her hands on her jeans and looked over at Weston. "Do you ever think people only stay if they don't know the whole story?" she asked. Weston didn't answer right away. He pulled a stubborn root from the ground and held it in his hand. "Maybe," he said, "but I think the ones who stay even after they know, that's what makes it real." She looked at him, her voice almost too soft to hear. "I've never let anyone see all of it before." "I see it," he said, "and I'm still here." That night they lit a fire in the old pit behind the barn. Lily insisted on making s'mores, and Weston let her toast his marshmallow even, though she burned it black. The stars came out one by one and they stayed up late, wrapped in old blankets, sharing stories that felt less like confession and more like release. Eleanor stopped by the next morning with a basket of honey scones and a quiet smile. She didn't say much, but when Lily ran into her arms with a joyful, "Grandma," Eleanor didn't flinch. She knelt down, hugged the little girl back, and whispered something into her ear that made her giggle. Later, when Savannah poured them each a cup of tea, Eleanor looked at her across the kitchen table and said, "Children don't need perfect. They need present." Savannah nodded, unsure if she could speak without crying. A few weeks later, Weston took Savannah and Lily riding. They saddled up the gentlest horses, and Lily sat between them, squealing with delight as the horse plodded through the fields. The wind was warm, the sun soft, and Savannah closed her eyes for a moment as they moved forward, letting the rhythm of hooves settle something deep inside her. They came to a small clearing by the stream where Weston used to camp as a boy. They laid out a blanket, unpacked sandwiches and lemonade, and watched Lily float sticks in the current. "She told her teacher she has 2 homes now," Savannah said quietly, her voice full of wonder. She said, "One before, and one that I like better." Weston looked over at her. "And how about you?" Savannah was quiet for a long time. Then, "I didn't think I could have a second home. Not after Mason, not after everything. I thought maybe surviving was all I had left." Weston reached over and took her hand. "It's not," he said. "Not anymore." They didn't need to say the rest. Not that day. Not in words. That night, after Lily was asleep, Savannah stood at the back door watching the breeze move through the fields. The moon hung full and low, casting everything in silver. Weston came up behind her, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and they stood in silence. "I used to think healing would come all at once," she said, barely above a whisper. "Like a storm passing or a breath catching, right? But now I think it's more like this." "Like what?" he asked. "Like planting a garden," she said. "Messy, slow. Half the time you don't know if anything's going to come up, but one day you look down and realize something's growing." Weston nodded. "And you realize you're still standing." Savannah turned to him, her face soft. "Not just standing, choosing." He leaned his forehead against hers, their hands still wrapped together. No promises, no declarations, just presence. Inside the house, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring about foxes and fireflies. The walls, once echoing with fear, now held something else: laughter, movement, breath. Savannah smiled, the kind of smile that isn't loud but runs deep. She had started this journey alone, with a broken body and a burning child. Now she stood with her daughter asleep in the next room, and a man beside her who had never once asked her to be anything other than herself. It wasn't safety. Not yet. It was better. It was home. Somewhere out there, someone is quietly surviving what no one sees. And sometimes all it takes is one hand reaching out and choosing not to let go. At Fortune's Wrath, we believe in the quiet power of compassion, resilience, and the kind of love that does not shout but stays. If you felt moved by this journey, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we share true-to-life stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of the goodness still found in everyday hearts. Because sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that stay with us long after the screen fades to black. Subscribe now to Fortune's Wrath, and let the next story find its way to your soul.